There's growing excitement that the Las Vegas Raiders might land Ben Johnson, one of the NFL's top play callers. The momentum is reportedly building, with insider Vincent Monner tweeting about it recently. Honestly, when I first heard about the possibility of Ben Johnson joining the Raiders, I didn't think it was very likely. When you consider all the other teams out there, along with the talented quarterbacks available for him to coach, I figured he'd lean toward those options. Teams like the Chicago Bears with Caleb Williams, the Jacksonville Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence, or even the New England Patriots before they hired Mike Vrabel all seem like more attractive choices. The Raiders, on the other hand, don't have a clear franchise quarterback, at least not one with proven success. Plus, they're not in a great position to draft a new QB either. So, in my mind, it didn't seem like a realistic option for Ben Johnson. But as time's gone on, I've started to see things differently, especially considering the influence Tom Brady has had on the Raiders. Earlier today, I listened to a press conference where Ben Johnson was asked a series of questions. One answer he gave really stood out to me. It made me realize that Ben Johnson might actually prefer the Raiders more than I originally thought, and there's a real chance he could end up in Las Vegas after all. This got me thinking more about what Ben Johnson is truly looking for in his next coaching opportunity. During a recent interview, he was asked how this year's interview process compared to last year's. He explained that this time around, he's being much more specific about what he wants in a team. As a potential head coach, he emphasized the importance of ensuring not only the offense is solid, but also that the defense is in a strong position. This made me realize that Ben Johnson might be leaning toward the Raiders, particularly because of their defense. While it's likely that Patrick Graham, the Raiders' current defensive coordinator, won't be returning, he's done an impressive job with the defense. Under his leadership, the Raiders have brought in some talented players who could help build a successful defense moving forward. Take Nate Hobbs and Trayvon Mullen, for example. Both players have shown promise, with Graham helping develop them into key assets. I'd even argue that the Raiders had a top-5 secondary last season, and that doesn't even include young players like Duran Bennett and Jack Jones, or others like Isaiah Paulau. On top of that, players like Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins are among the top 5 to 7 players at their positions, adding even more strength to the defense. When Ben Johnson looks at the teams on his radar, the Raiders' defensive lineup could be a major factor in his decision-making process. With this kind of talent on defense, the Raiders might be a more appealing option than I initially thought. When Ben Johnson looks at teams like the New England Patriots or the Chicago Bears, he's likely weighing the strengths of both their offenses and defenses. Sure, the offensive side of the game is something he can control, and we've seen him turn offenses into top-performing units. But when it comes to the defense, that's a different story. He can't simply bring in top defensive players like Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, or Tyreek Wilson to those teams. This is where the Raiders stand out. Their defense has legitimate playmakers that few other teams can match. While some may disagree, from a talent perspective, the Raiders have one of the best defensive rosters in the league. I can't help but think Ben Johnson might recognize this, and maybe even Tom Brady, who has strong ties to the Raiders, has helped sell him on the idea. Either way, the Raiders' defense could be a major draw for Ben Johnson, especially since he can't control or directly impact a team's defensive roster. It's clear that adding playmakers to a defense through a draft or free agency doesn't happen overnight, and no matter what team he considers, that's something he can't easily fix. Additionally, something else that came out today made me think even more. Adam Schefter reported that the Raiders did not try to trade up for Jalon Daniels, despite rumors circulating that they had made multiple offers to the Washington Commanders. According to Schefter, that wasn't true. This adds another layer to the conversation, showing that the Raiders may not be all in on a specific quarterback, which could influence Ben Johnson's decision as well. Apparently, when Ben Johnson interviewed for the Washington Commanders' head coach position last year, he had one major request. He wanted quarterback Sam Howell to be the team's starting QB. In fact, it seemed like Ben made it a condition for taking the job. However, Adam Peters, who had already been hired as the general manager at the time, made it clear that the Commanders were set on drafting Jalon Daniels, not Howell. Peters told Ben Johnson that they weren't going to stick to his preferred quarterback and that they were firm on their choice. A report from Washington insider Lake Lewis Jr. sheds light on the situation, revealing that Ben Johnson's preference for Howell was based on their past Carolina connections. Despite this, Peters stood his ground, stating that the Commanders knew exactly who they were going to draft, and it wasn't Howell. In fact, Peter's decision to stick with Jalen Daniels showed leadership and clarity, even if it wasn't what Ben Johnson had hoped for. It's clear that Johnson was more aligned with Howell, but he had to come to terms with the team's decision. This story gives us more insight into Ben Johnson's mindset and how important having the right quarterback is for his coaching philosophy. Some people might find it surprising that Ben Johnson preferred Sam Howell over Jalen Daniels, but when you think about it from a coaching perspective, it makes more sense. Ben Johnson likely values a quarterback who can run a structured offense and deliver the ball accurately within the system he's trying to build. He might not be as interested in quarterbacks like Caleb Williams, whose best skill is creating magic outside of the play's design. While Williams is incredibly talented, his ability to improvise and play off script could be something Ben Johnson doesn't prioritize, especially if he's aiming for a more controlled, structured attack. Jalen Daniels is a bit more in line with what Johnson might want. He's better at staying within the structure of an offense than Caleb Williams, but maybe Ben still prefers a quarterback who operates even more within the system. This could be where guys like Sam Howell, Jared Goff, or even Aiden O'Connell come into play. These are quarterbacks who can run a well-organized offense, make the right reads, and deliver the ball to the right spots. Ben Johnson could very well prefer these types of quarterbacks, who execute the system as designed, over players who thrive more on making things happen outside the structure. While it's not a certainty, it wouldn't surprise me if Ben Johnson leans toward a quarterback who fits his offensive system, someone who plays within the framework of the play rather than relying on off-script magic. His preference for Sam Howell in Washington could be an indicator of that, and it's a good reason to believe he might lean toward more structured quarterbacks in the future. This could be the reason why Ben Johnson ultimately turned down the Washington Commanders' head coaching job. From the reports, it seems like he was the one offered the position, but after some consideration, he chose to stay with the Detroit Lions, who gave him a raise to keep him on board. It's an interesting turn of events, especially when you look at the bigger picture. The Raiders, for example, didn't appear to try to trade up with the Commanders for the quarterback they were targeting, Jalen Daniels. And while it makes sense for the Commanders to stick with Daniels, since he's performed well so far, it's still unknown if he'll develop into a top-tier quarterback. The first year can be impressive, but as NFL teams study a player, they start exploiting weaknesses, and it's not always clear if a rookie can keep up that early success in the long run. That being said, it's exciting to think about the possibility of Ben Johnson joining the Las Vegas Raiders. The team's defense and the talent they already have on that side of the ball might be a strong selling point for him. Maybe he sees potential in players like Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins that could help him build a successful team. It's also possible that Ben Johnson has another plan in mind. Perhaps he's eyeing a quarterback like Hendon Hooker, maybe even bringing him over from the Lions, should he land a new head coach role. Then again, we don't really know if Hooker is his guy. There's still a lot of uncertainty about what exactly Ben Johnson's plans are. But one thing's for sure, if the Raiders do manage to bring him on board, it could be a game changer for the team. I'm feeling confident that the Raiders are heading in the right direction, but there are a couple of reports that caught my attention recently. Jeremy Fowler shared that Pete Carroll spent much of Monday afternoon at the Raiders headquarters for an in-person interview regarding the head coach position. This is noteworthy because Carroll is a proven Super Bowl winning coach and has a strong defensive background. He's someone who's called plays on the defensive side before and has led successful teams throughout his career. What's interesting here is that Pete Carroll has already met with the Raiders face-to-face, while Ben Johnson's interview was conducted via Zoom. This could play a role in the Raiders' decision-making process moving forward. If the Detroit Lions make it deep into the playoffs, the Raiders might not be able to meet with Ben Johnson in person for a couple of weeks, which could delay things. Meanwhile, Carroll has already had his meeting with the team, which could give him an edge. Another name that's been tossed around is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator. While the Raiders haven't officially requested an interview with him yet, he's another potential candidate to keep an eye on. But right now, I would argue that Pete Carroll is likely the second choice for the Raiders behind Ben Johnson. If they can't secure Johnson, Carroll seems to be the next best option, and his in-person interview might indicate that the Raiders are very interested in bringing him on board. I wouldn't be upset if the Raiders ended up hiring Pete Carroll. Generally speaking, I prefer coaches who are play callers and can really take charge of the offense, but there are certainly defensive coaches who've proven themselves and found success. Pete Carroll is definitely one of those coaches. He's been successful in multiple roles and has a strong track record, so if the Raiders bring him in, I wouldn't have any complaints. In addition to head coach candidates, the Raiders are also looking into potential candidates for their general manager position. One name that has come up is Sheldon White, the Pittsburgh Steelers director of pro personnel. White brings a lot of experience to the table. He's worked with various teams over the years, including the Washington Commanders, and his work as a scout and his overall reputation make him an interesting option for the Raiders. It'll be interesting to see how the situation plays out, but he's certainly someone to keep an eye on. At the moment, it seems like Ben Johnson is the front runner for the head coach position, but we'll have to wait and see how things unfold. It's possible that the Raiders will hire a general manager first, which could then influence the head coach decision. Whatever happens, I'm excited to see where the Raiders go from here. Let me know what you all think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates. I'll see you next time with another video.